Oops. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks all of you for having made it this afternoon with us. Let me start off by saying how glad we are to be co-organizing this event together with the Institute for World Policy. This is the first such event that we organize together with you. We hope it won't be the last. It isn't obviously the first event that we are organizing here in Rome to discuss Ukraine, the Ukraine crisis, and the implications for the European Union. Indeed, we feel that having this debate in Rome, where up until recently issues related to Eastern Europe weren't regularly discussed, is actually very healthy and indeed fundamental at this point in time. So let me simply say how happy we are to be organizing this with you. In thinking about the theme of the day, the role for the European Union in the crisis in Ukraine, it seems to me that there are various aspects that should and probably will be unpacked over the course of the afternoon. It's clear that there is a big story that has to do, obviously, with EU-Russia relations, largely centered around the debate on sanctions. It's clear that sanctions have had a number of effects already, and the question is, what will the effects of those sanctions be as we move forward, hopefully, towards a resolution of the crisis. They've certainly already had an effect in terms of strengthening European credibility. No one really thought that the EU would actually go ahead with the sanctions policy. It's becoming increasingly clear that they are having an impact on the Russian economy, of course coupled with other developments such as the energy price crisis, if you like. And we're beginning to see the very dramatic effects of those developments in these days with the collapse of the ruble. Now, clearly, the EU-Russia story isn't confined to sanctions, if you like. There will be, and probably will increasingly be, future chapters to that story that will necessarily have to be opened if we are to move from a crisis stage to a resolution stage of the conflict in Ukraine. So there's, in a sense, another big aspect which is dormant now, but which will necessarily have to be activated as we move into the future. And then clearly there is the broader question of what with the Eastern Partnership countries are going to look like in the months and years ahead. It's clear that the neighborhood policy, particularly with Ukraine, but also, of course, with Georgia and Moldova, has reached a particular stage with the DCFTAs. What's less clear is what comes after that, and whether what comes after that is a step forward in integration, as obviously many of the countries in the Eastern Partnership would like, and some member states within the European Union, or whether the way forward is taking, in a sense, not necessarily a step back, but a step sideways in thinking about, in a sense, the more fundamental basics of state building, which are really missing to a large extent in the region, and of course which have been exemplified by the way in which the crisis in Ukraine has unfolded. Now we're beginning to see again the first steps of this with the EU's security sector reform mission, and so I guess there's quite a lot to discuss on whether that mission holds much promise, the way in which it should be implemented and it should be bolstered in future. But let me stop here. I just wanted to set out some of the issues which I guess will be elaborated on by our panelists today. And let me give the floor to Alonia.
Thank you, Natalie. On behalf of Institute of World Policy from Kiev, I would like actually to thank you as our partner, Institute of Affari Internazionali, for making this event possible here in Rome. Italy is, as a place of this discussion, was chosen not occasionally. We appreciate Italy's, actually the role your country, a constructive role, I would say, your country playing in terms of Russia-Ukraine's crisis during its last half a year, during Italy's presidency in European Union Council. We also appreciate the efforts of former Italian Foreign Minister and now currently High Representative of the EU Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, is making now in order to solve our crisis. Maybe not our crisis, but crisis around Ukraine, I would say. Regarding a topic of our discussion, I'd like to emphasize that the European Union began to play a significant role in Ukraine long before, namely at the moment when the EU became the most attractive model of the development for the majority of Ukrainians. This year, European choice became irreversible for Ukraine and its people. Russia, by its action, deprived us of the alternative. Ukrainians have no more to choose between EU and custom union or Eurasian union with Russia. Ukraine made European choice irreversible also by signing an association agreement with the European Union. Ukraine got an agreement with the EU at extremely high price, and we continue paying this price now. I think that no one nation in Europe paid so high price for thousands of people's lives for being just associated with the European Union without even membership perspective. However, it should be made clear that Ukraine is fighting not for the right to join the European Union, but for the right to shape its own future and remain a sovereign state. We cannot let somebody else to determine our future instead of Ukrainian people's. At the moment, Ukraine's European integration is supported by 64% of Ukrainians. For majority of Ukrainians, European integration is seen as the most appropriate tool to modernize the country, to carry out important reforms faster and more effectively. Importantly, unlike previous year when the revolution only started, majority of Ukrainians support their country membership in the European Union consciously, without excessive illusions. Ukrainians now tend to depend more on their own resources. They no longer rely on good kin, even if this good kin is European Union. Ukrainians became less naive and less paternalistic towards the EU. From the Ukrainian point of view, when the EU signed association agreement with Ukraine, it took over a part of the responsibility for the developments in Ukraine. A part of responsibility, but not the blame. The European Union is to be blamed only for one thing. It has underestimated how important the European idea became for the most active, for the crucial part, I would say, of Ukrainian society. For more and more people in Ukraine, it's becoming clear that EU and Russia have mutually exclusive interest in Ukraine. Europeanization versus Sovietization, modernization versus conservation, stabilization versus destabilization. The EU should realize that for Ukraine there is no way back. Fortunately or unfortunately for some European member states, sooner or later Ukraine will be integrated in European political and economical space. But with EU support and with Italy's support and unity inside the European Union, we will do it faster and much more effectively. Thank you, Natalie, and I wish us a good and fruitful discussion today.
Thank you, Alyona. Thank you, Natalie. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for accepting our invitation. I said today we discuss the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and particularly the EU's role in this conflict as a mediator, EU's capacity as a conflict manager in current crisis. Dealing with these three actors, the 2014 will be remembered as the year that the established European security system was and order has been violated, and especially this concept of inviolability of borders. This situation didn't come by chance. It came with the clear aims, and the response the EU will deliver will decide not only the future of Ukraine, but I think it will decide also the future of the political and security order of this continent. As Natalie mentioned, so far the response of the EU was the sanctions. It came gradually, we all remember this, in order to leave the door open also for the negotiations. The EU decided for the sectoral sanctions only after shutting down the Malaysian airlines and after Russia's violation of the Minsk agreement of September. But this decision then caused this internal debate inside of the EU whether the sanctions are effective, whether the sanctions should continue, whether they should be lifted, or whether they are enough effective in order to change President Putin's behavior in Ukraine. Meanwhile, we know that President Barack Obama will sign new legislation later this week imposing new sanctions on Russia, and legislation which permits to President Obama to sell arms to Ukraine. So with this context in mind, I would like to turn the floor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Italy here, asking him in particular what is the internal discourse here in Italy regarding the situation as a whole, regarding the sanctions, whether the EU will be united in its decision next year, because it has to decide whether to go on with the sanctions or not. The perception is that Italy is for re-engagement with Russia. I wonder whether there is some strategy behind this word, what it could mean the re-engagement with Russia on Ukraine. Thank you.
How many hours do I have?
10,
as you wish.
10, 15 minutes.
No.
3 hours.
No, 3 hours. No, a couple of minutes. No, thank you very much indeed to both institutes that have organized this event, because it's very helpful to at least to understand, given the audience, the Ukraine perception. I wonder now that I'm flying back from Moscow 2 hours ago, so I'm very fresh from the Red Square and from some talks that I had yesterday in Moscow about EU-Russia relations, about Italy-Russia relations, and also about the Ukrainian crisis. So allow me, I think it's not the kind of panel when you have to develop a lecture, be very brief, just given in a nutshell some bullet points. Explaining at least how we look at the situation, which are the potential answers to some of the $1 million questions that Natalie raised at the very beginning, and something about the breaking news. Let's start from the breaking news. Everybody's engaged in this conflict for the better and not for the worse. That said, I'm glad to verify on the ground that the ceasefire that was established December the 9th is still holding on the ground. Let's start from here, because every crisis has to be dealt with step by step, day by day. This has been an awful year. I would like to remind to all of the people here gathered in this hall that we are living in an arch of instability in the southern part of the world, which starts from Mali, from the western shore of the Atlantic Ocean, moves to the Sahel, to the Horn of Africa, to the Gulf, to Iran, Iraq, AfPak. Needless to say that we don't lack a new crisis. We're not missing new crises to deal with. So if we're able to solve one by one the many crises that we're facing in this year, it's for the sake of the world. I mean, not for just for doing politics as politics. So the ceasefire is holding on the ground. That's good news. It didn't happen last time. There was an attempt in September, and from September to December we had 1,350 additional casualties. I see a true engagement from both sides. We are working on a daily basis in order to implement the disengagement plan, which, as you know, is about withdrawing heavy armored vehicles from the ground. It's about implementing a buffer zone, and it's about exchanging the prisoners from now to the end of this year. So let's move from this breaking news, which is a good one. I'd like to underline the very rare good news that we have on the ground, because I was just reading a few minutes ago two statements on news agency, one by the Polish president, the other one by the Romanian president. The Polish president saying ready to provide weapons to Kiev, Romanian president saying ready to push new sanctions because the Russian economy is breaking down. So my question is, who's going to take profit from that? There's a meeting which should happen in Minsk in 3 days from now. We are working to strengthen a dialogue and a situation on the ground that can save human lives. So I don't think anybody needs weapons, first of all. Second, who could take profit from the collapse of Russian economy? Who? Name me a single nation in the world that could take some profit from the collapse of Russian economy. It's quite clear that sanctions have been effective. But I would like to emphasize a comment that Natalie made at the very beginning. So it's not only about sanctions. It's about the fluctuation of the ruble, which lost half of its value in a few days, and just 2 days ago was on a real roller coaster, touching the 100 ratio with the euro and 80 something with the dollar. And it's about the collapse of the oil price. And you know that there are many speculations about the reason why the oil price is fluctuating and is collapsing in this way. So I wouldn't be sure of any theory that I have been reading in the last few weeks. Depending on the source, somebody says that it's done to hit U.S. shale gas. Somebody says that it's done to hit Iran P5+1 negotiations. Somebody else says that it's done to hit Russian economy. I don't know. Maybe OPEC was not able simply to find an agreement, and that's the true reality. But simply speaking, I don't see any interest in this international disorder to have an economy like the Russian economy collapsing. And I would like to make a footnote on this, and the footnote is that it's true that the European Union has shown an unusual degree of solidarity in imposing the 3 rounds of sanctions, unusual. I would like, as a footnote, to say that in the last 7 months, you know that Euro-Russian intertrade is 12 times the US-Russia intertrade. In the last 7 months, the Euro-Russian intertrade went down 20%. The US-Russia intertrade went up 12%. No need to make any comment about that. So we are paying a price to a political choice, but it's not going to last forever, because as the Prime Minister said yesterday, and as the Foreign Minister said a couple of days ago, sanctions are not a value in itself. They are used to make pressure to try to change the behavior. But allow me to quote US President Barack Obama when he said that 65 years of isolation about Cuba just today were not effective in the final aim to change the behavior of Cuba. So we could debate about the effectiveness of sanctions and of the way sanctions have to be used in order to change the behavior of one nation, of one country. So it's open for debate. What I'm saying is that I would like to, we are helping the new government in Kiev we are pushing, as you know, collectively, the government to have some behaviors in terms of inclusiveness in the many reforms that have been discussed with the European Union. Unless the Kiev government has to make a different choice, so to let some province go away and then to have a more homogeneous country and then to ask for more aid. I mean, it is about the Ukrainian ownership. But as far as Ukraine is in this situation, it's quite clear that a lot of things have to be done also from Kiev's side in terms of dialogue and inclusiveness in his reform plan. Natalie made a comment, a really $1 billion comment, which is about the strategy of the EU vis-à-vis its eastern border, which is much more than the Ukrainian crisis. And allow me to say that it's not only about the northeast border, it's about the eastern border, because we could discuss also about the strategy about Turkey. So it's about everything that is not sea and water. We have natural borders north, west, south. We don't have any natural border east, and we are missing a strategy. Either in the southeast corner of Europe, namely Turkey, namely Caucasus, and then going north to the post-Soviet space and to Russia. So I think that the new commission, starting from the new High Representative, has a big, not big dilemma, but has a big mandate, which is about involving the 28 member states about two different strategies. On a short-term basis, on a short and mid-term basis, how to deal with the Ukrainian crisis, but in the longer term, how to deal with the Russian issue. Because it's quite clear, I mean, everybody of us has a memory, has a remembering of what happened in the last 15 years. We started from the partnership agreement, then we moved, we pushed Moscow in negotiating with WTO and becoming part of the G8 and so on. Can we say now, okay, everything's failed. We are on the point to build a new wall. A virtual wall, concrete wall, but something to separate the EU from Russia. It's impossible. So we have to engage somehow Moscow in a different format, in a different strategy, but we can't be dismissive. Otherwise, and let me tell you, somebody says if that will happen, Moscow will be forced to make a sort of pivot to Asia. We all know that it's impossible. It's simply impossible. Even Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan understands that it's impossible from a different geographical position to be only part of the Asian part of the world. And we all know that where Kazakhstan is located in the map. So it's impossible for more than a reason for Moscow and for Russia to be simply part of the Asian world. So it must be involved and engaged from an EU perspective. The real issue is that we have a toolbox that maybe has to be updated, because the traditional tools that we have simply failed. So we were hoping with this kind of strategy to have a liberal democratic country in Moscow, a liberal democratic system, something similar to the West. It didn't happen. Simply speaking, it didn't happen. So there's something deeper that we have to understand in Russian mentality, which is not about Putin's mentality, it's about Russian mentality. In these very days, Putin is having one of the highest degree of popularity in his own country, so totally different with the situation that he had just a couple of years ago. And so I think that we have a very complex challenge ahead of us. But I would like to finish my comments from the point I started. Now we have to focus on a daily basis in order to strengthen the ceasefire and to allow the two parts on the ground to have a dialogue. Needless to say that we are totally open to any diplomatic format that shows to be effective. Is the Normandy framework, is about the JCC, whatever you like. The real issue is how to control the spillover of a crisis and to have a direct talks between the two parts. Then we know that the EU will have to pay, a price, a support to the reforms of of Kiev. We know that there is a final statement in the 21st, I don't remember exactly the date, for Foreign Affairs Council of February 21st, which was about the association agreement is not the final goal. So there's a question mark in the debate about the future of Kiev within the EU framework. I read very carefully some statement from the Prime Minister about a future plan in joining EU and NATO in a long-term framework. I mean, every long walk starts with one step, one single step. So the first single step is how to overcome the crisis, how to save humanitarian, how to stop the spillover and the spread of the crisis. Then we will see. But it's quite clear that all of the 28 have to debate about this strategic question, which is about an Eastern strategy, which is not only limited to Kiev or to Minsk, but goes far beyond to Moscow. And I think that in this case, we should need to debate not only in the format of the Foreign Affairs Council, but something which has to be smarter and out of the box. Because I am not attending the Foreign Affairs Councils, but in the different formats which are the Councils on Development. But it's quite clear that I come back home every time with a little sense of disappointment when I see that everybody is able to find a compromise, but is looking to the geographical map. Somebody looking at the past, somebody looking at the future, somebody looking only in the inner circle of his neighbors, and somebody looking to the outer world. So we need we really need a fine-tuning in the way we have to address this issue. Otherwise, the strategic answer won't come for many years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming back to sanctions, I think that the effectiveness of the sanctions could be measured only in long term. And I think that the aim of the sanctions is not only to change somehow Putin's behavior in Ukraine, but to prevent him to take in other territories, because without sanctions, I'm pretty sure that we can find Russian troops in Mariupol as well, and not only in Donetsk, for example, let alone Odessa, or some kind of escalation in Transnistria as well. With this, let me change the order. I'm sorry for this. Let me change the order of the panel. I would like to give the floor to our Russian expert, Andrei Makarichev, professor at the Institute of Government and Politics at the University of Tartu in Estonia. And the sanctions again, no, we are discussing whether it changed behavior, but I'm wondering also whether the contract President Putin is having with its own society. The Deputy Minister already said that now Putin is having this popularity, and all the social polls tell us that his popularity is very high, but let's put all this in the perspective and analyze how the sanctions and this economic crisis will shatter the contract between president and population. Thank you.
Okay, I will come back to this at the very end of my 5-6 minute talk. I just wanted to start by saying that, of course, I'm fully aware how controversial are debates on Russia and Ukraine in Italy, because usually those debates are put in very kind of ideological frameworks, not always, but quite often. And these ideological frameworks, I think, they come in two different versions. On the one hand, in many EU member states, including Italy, there are multiple Russia understanders who articulate their positions in explicitly ideological way, and we all know about that. On the other hand, there is, and I think this is a very dangerous trend for the whole Europe, there is a political, and I would even venture to claim ideological rift within Europe. between countries who have different visions of what kind of policy has to be conducted towards Russia and Ukraine. And sometimes they boil down to kind of perceptual gaps between, let's say, countries like Italy or Estonia. But in other cases, they kind of resemble the old debates between old and new Europe. So that's what we have on the continent. And I just wanted to mention that Russia, in this case, plays kind of a role of a politicizing actor. So Russia explicitly politicized the situation in order to split Europe apart and, to put it bluntly, to bury the European project. This is the most important political danger that countries of the European Union have to face. But the paradox here is that Russia itself is not an ideological actor at all. I would call it a kind of trans-ideological. Russia is just playing with ideologies. Russia just pragmatically uses these different ideological projects. And that's why I think it's extremely important to critically kind of reassess different approaches to Russia and its soft power impositions, which are very much based on ideological things. So the question is, what kind of Russia we are dealing with? And this is, I think, the most important question, which would allow me to come back to your question. I think there are at least two misunderstandings concerning Russia and what kind of country Russia is. Many of the left-wing admirers of Putin think that Russia deserves credit and support because it allegedly is a fighter, if not the fighter, against the neo-Nazis. Well, I would say that this is very far from being true. First of all, the threat of neo-Nazism is very much overrated, be it Ukraine or Baltic countries. It's grossly overestimated. Look at the electoral results. Secondly, I would say that it's Russia itself that kind of reproduces, how shall I say, kind of explicitly totalitarian and very much regulatory discourses. And there are many people very close to the mainstream discourse who are characterized by many European experts as fascists. I can give you an example of Alexander Dugin, for example, and the opinion of the German scholar who lives in Ukraine, Andreas Umland, about that. Then there is one more argument which needs to be taken into account. Russia develops very clearly articulated imperial identity. That's what we clearly see in the case of, it's not a nation-state building project. It's basically an imperial project. And the Ukrainian case nicely demonstrates that. And finally, one more argument here would be that the situation with minority rights in Russia is very deplorable. Take the anti-migration attitudes, take the problems with the LGBT, and I think this argument has to be taken into account by the left forces in Europe as well. One of the most important poles in the international system. And I would also add to this that economically Russia, unfortunately, has all chances to economically again become a Chinese province or Chinese colony instead of becoming a sovereign nation state. And that's what is widely debated in the Russian public opinion as well. Now, concerning your question, this is the most enigmatic part of the whole story, and we do need to face reality 80% approval rating of Putin. Which is more or less measurable sociologically. Well, frankly speaking, I don't think how long this 80% would last, because the economic crisis and many unpleasant things which Russian citizens have to experience, starting from the lack of cash in the bank, and then the inflation and the rise of price, etc. Well, my hope is that the Russian population would ultimately kind of restore the causal links between what happened in Crimea and this social and economic deprivations. And this kind of social contract will be, well, how shall I say, reconsidered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Returning to the misunderstanding of Russia, I think that the West is kind of used to see Russia and Putin as a pragmatic, rational leader. But I think that they should also consider that the whole situation has got like an ideological turn as well for Putin that could be more dangerous now. And that's why I think that for Ukraine there is no military solution in any case for this conflict, and I think that the only chance to win the game for Ukraine is successful economic and democratic transition in a situation where critical financial situation of Ukraine. So we have now the new government with new challenges, and with this I would like to give the floor to our Ukrainian speaker, Alexei Haran. He is a scientific director of the School for Political Analysis and professor of the National University of the Kiev-Mohyla Academy in Ukraine. Please, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, because I have PowerPoint presentation, so while it's warming, it's there. Because before it warmed up, I would like to make some clarification and reaction. Should we talk about Ukrainian crisis? When we're talking about Ukrainian crisis, it means something domestic, that you have a crisis inside. So in this sense, I would say that yes, we did have Ukrainian crisis when there was Maidan and when people were standing against corrupt and criminal regime of Yanukovych, supported by Kremlin. It was Ukrainian crisis. Is everything going fine? No. Excuse me, can you help me? Where is it?
I think you are part of the
No. I have it here. I really need it. Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So, but the nature of what was going in Ukraine changed after escape of Yanukovych, after there was a new government, legitimization, I would say quite smooth legitimization of the new government, and then started Russian infiltration, their end annexation of Crimea and Russian regular troops in the east of the country. So it changed the nature of what was going on in Ukraine. It wasn't Ukrainian crisis anymore. Now we should talk about, well, I would say Russian diplomatical infiltration in Ukraine. We can talk about Russian-Ukrainian. We will not understand what's going on in Ukraine. So let me come back. By the way, today Putin has had his great speech, and actually he repeated all his previous comments about the crisis, let's say that. So who was guilty? Definitely not Russia. The West. Russia is only defending. So the West is guilty, Ukrainian opposition is guilty, so actually I do not see the change in Russian rhetoric. You see the famous Euromaidan, and you see the famous pine tree with the flags of the EU and Ukrainian flags at the top, and also a lot of different other flags of different other nations here. But what is interesting, this is also the picture from Maidan. What banner do we see at the center? The Russian flag. So it means those people from Russia or Russians who are in Ukraine, they brought the flag of Russia to Maidan, because Maidan wasn't anti-Russian. Vice versa, it was viewed by many Russian liberals as a support to democracy in Russia. This is also from Maidan. It's in Russian, and it says, "We are brothers with Russians by blood, but we are not brothers in slavery." And the signature, Sevastopolets, a person from Sevastopol, from Crimea. Okay? So again, it's very important to understand that the whole idea of contemporary Ukrainian nation is based not on ethnic principles, but a territorial one. So it's inclusive and not exclusive. And the paradox is that despite the war in Donbass, Putin's aggression, well, that's how academics would say, diplomats, how diplomats would say, Putin's actions in Donbass, they actually cemented Ukrainian political identity, whatever languages Ukrainians speak and whatever confessions they belong to. Guess what is my mother tongue? Russian, yes. This is my... So I've mastered Ukrainian only after actually graduating the school and the university, because I graduated from Russian-speaking school and Russian-speaking university. But the point is that it doesn't matter what language do you speak. So now the main principle, are you in favor of independent, democratic and integral Ukraine? That's the most important. And Russian speakers and locals from Donbass comprise huge part of Ukrainian army and of volunteer battalions which are fighting in Donbass for integrity of Ukraine. So it's I was there. As political scientist, I went there to see these people. I have a lot of photos, I can share it with you. And these people are saying in Russia, we are fighting against Putin for Ukrainian Donbass. Okay, so it's not at all, the conflict between Russians and Ukrainians, Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers. Again, it's a scheme which we can find very often in Western press. What has happened actually, again, Putin is saying it was Western organized coup d'etat Maidan. Definitely not. There were non-violent protests which continued for 2 months. Without any support from the West. Do you know when the first Western sanctions arrived? Against Yanukovych, not against Russia, but against Yanukovych, which we asked the West. They arrived after Yanukovych escaped the country. Okay? So perhaps if there would be more coherent and sharp Western reaction to what was going on in the center of European capital of Kiev, there would be no bloodshed in the center of Kiev, where people died under EU flags. Well, after escape of Yanukovych, the constitutional reform returned, so it made the whole constitutional system much more balanced. So now there's no monopolization of power. And if you mention parliamentary elections, we have president who belongs to one party, prime minister who belongs to another party, and they are to share their responsibility and to work together. There would be no monopolization of power, which is good. Early presidential and parliamentary elections happened. They were free and fair and competitive. Even Yanukovych party participated. Again, it's important to remember. Despite all happened, Yanukovych party also participated. Its support definitely reduced hugely. And pro-European parties got 70% on party slate. So definitely Ukrainians voted for Europe, for support of Europe. My good friend Andrei mentioned about the stories of right-wing radicals in Kiev. So I would like, which are exploited by Russian press and sometimes by Western journalists as well. So let me give you figures that the right sector, far right, during parliamentary elections they secured only 2% of the vote. Okay? And I just suggest to compare it with the result of National Front in France. You know how large is the faction of far right in the European Parliament. In Ukrainian Parliament there are 3 MPs from the far right. Do we have far right? Yes, we do. As in every country, 3 out of 450. Okay, as I have said, the crisis changed the nature after Crimea's annexation. You know pretty well. This is the first annexation, territorial annexation in Europe after World War II. It's the first territorial annexation. Because, for example, what happened in northern Cyprus wasn't annexation from the foreign point of view. But here it was direct violation of the whole post-World War II order. And I would like to draw your attention to this wonderful medal which is issued by Russia. The medal for return of Crimea. What is interesting, you see the dates. dated February 20. Yanukovych left the country on February 22nd. So actually, Russians started to liberate Crimea, when Yanukovych was still a president. So it means the whole operation was planned well in advance. Definitely nobody was asking about the fate of Crimean Tatars, right? What is interesting, you know that in Soviet times, Crimean Tatars were not allowed to come back to Crimea. If you are coming back to Crimea, you are deported immediately. What's going right now? Leaders of Crimean Tatars are not allowed to come to Crimea. Mustafa Dzhemilev, 15 years in Soviet prisons. He's not allowed to go to Crimea again. So we can ask Mr. Putin if he's going to allow Mustafa Dzhemilev to come back to Crimea. What's going on with Ukrainian citizens which are seized and are imprisoned in Russia? So definitely all these questions, they remain. You see the pictures of Crimean Tatars who are stating that Crimea is part of Ukraine. Again, nobody asks them where they would like to be, in Ukraine or in Russia. Now, as to what's going on right now in the east of Ukraine, Mr. Pistelli said there are two sides, and I asked you, what are the sides? Kyiv is one side, the other side, you mentioned pro-Russian forces, right? Okay, so now, you see the territory which was controlled by pro-Russian separatists at the end of August, before interference of regular Russian troops. After that, the territory slightly increased. Okay, they seized important port on Azov coast. But in general, this territory, now the territory which is controlled by pro-Russian separatists with support of regular troops, and nobody can deny it, that there are regular Russian troops there, comprise 2% of the territory of Ukraine. 2%. Okay, so when Mr. Putin is talking about southeast, where's southeast? I don't see it actually. Definitely his plan A, to control Ukraine, failed. His plan B, to split Ukraine, failed as well. But I think that he has a plan now. He has a plan to have a frozen conflict, to demand to recognize the separatists from political point of view, to provide autonomy or some kind of status for them, and by doing that, actually, to try to federalize Ukraine and to have this region, to provide this region with ability to control Ukrainian polity or to have veto power on Ukrainian policy. So now, as you mentioned, as you've seen, Putin slightly changed his rhetoric. He's not talking now about DNR or LNR or recognition of Novorossiya, New Russia. He's saying, okay, we are in favor of territorial integrity of Ukraine. But his idea is to legitimize pro-Russian separatists and continue to influence Ukrainian politics in order to prevent democratic and reform changes in Ukraine. Because the whole economy of Donbass is destroyed now. By the way, I have a question. When we are talking about separatists, for example in Scotland or Catalonia, do they destroy their own economy? Those people who want to secede? No. And in Donbass, you see totally different situation. Pro-Russian separatists, they are destroying the local economy. Why? Because again, the idea of Mr. Putin is to put this load on Ukraine so that Kyiv would finance it and divert resources from domestic reforms. What's the way out? The way out is to secure Minsk agreements, which were signed in late August, but still are not fulfilled. As to the ceasefire, yes, now we have reduced intention. Yesterday there were only 10 shellings of position of Ukrainian military and civilians. Only 10. We don't know what would happen next. There's no exchange of prisoners, because in Minsk agreement, all for all, it didn't happen. Control over Ukrainian-Russian border, which was in Minsk agreement, not provided. Okay. Elections in this area, and this was a huge compromise from Kyiv side. Local elections, which were to be held and should be based on Ukrainian laws, didn't happen. It was clearly stated in Minsk agreements that these elections should be based on Ukrainian laws. So, I would be happy to share the optimism, definitely. I am not in favor of economic collapse of Russia and world economy. Nobody is in favor of it. But we need to think how to, this is a huge challenge. We need to be very frank. The Western response to Crimea was weak. If it would be strong enough, there would be no continuation of Russian infiltration into Ukraine. Okay? So the Western sanctions were belated, but finally they started to work. And we are thankful for the EU, for the common position of the EU, for joint position with the US. But I mean, now we need to have not just words from Russia, but real deeds. And we shouldn't invent anything which is new. Everything is here, in Minsk agreements. Ceasefire, withdrawal of foreign mercenaries, which is also in Minsk agreements, control over Ukrainian-Russian border with the help of the OSCE. If it would be done, there would be the way out for political solution of this crisis. And I fully agree with both of you that there would be no military solution of this crisis. We need to find political solution. I agree. But we need also to send very clear signals to Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. Kind of feeling that you have the appetite for the frozen conflict. So I think that it would be quite pleased to have another frozen conflict in its eastern border. But I'm not quite sure whether Russia would be happy with the frozen conflict. When we are speaking about the frozen conflict, I was wondering what type of the conflict. It will be like in Abkhazia or South Ossetia, when the territory becomes like a no-gray zone, no-go zone. In this case, all the Donbas region should be on the Russian state budget, and I don't think that currently Russia, taking all the costs also for Crimea, could be able to afford itself also the Donbas region. So what could be future scenarios around the conflict, and most of all, what role for the EU in these scenarios? So I am pleased to give the floor to Andrew Wilson, Senior Policy Fellow from the European Council on Foreign Relations. So you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Well, I'll try and answer your unexpected question first. Frozen conflicts obviously have a bad name in the post-Soviet era, but given where we are now, freezing or isolating the conflict would not be the least bad option. Isolating and localizing the conflict, preventing it spreading. But as you yourself say, there are many types of frozen conflict situation already. Various degrees of Russian tutelage, sponsorship. Abkhazia, for example, is relatively independent, at least its economy was, has strong links to Turkey, whereas Transnistria has what's called the Putin top-up, a little bit of extra that the budget gets, and the pensions are higher. And that economic question, I think, is key. Ukraine, Kiev, only turned off the taps about 10 days ago now, so it's too early to tell, but currently we have 3 million people isolated from any sort of economic sustenance. if Russia doesn't pay, that really throws the ball back into Ukraine's court. I repeat, 3 million people. This is a looming humanitarian disaster. But to talk about the EU, talking about the EU and Ukraine this week is useful because Tuesday, so-called Black Tuesday, is another key turning point in this conflict. But this one I think is significant. Simultaneously, the ruble collapsed, and Obama said he would sign the Ukraine Freedom Support Act. So maybe not so black for Ukraine, maybe White Tuesday. The Ukraine Freedom Support Act changes many things. Firstly, it raises the stakes for the EU. Will it compete with the US with a free ride on American security provision? Or will it criticise the US for raising the stakes? I think the dichotomy of military or non-military solution is dangerous. It's not, the alternative to this is not nuclear Armageddon or World War. There are all sorts of gradations on either side. And what this US Act does is usefully change some of the gradations on the Western side. Firstly, a little bit of military aid, $350 million US over 3 years. That's actually less than was originally planned. It was going to be 350 million every year. But that's useful, both in physical terms and because it puts some uncertainty back into the equation. I think the worst thing we did diplomatically, particularly America, through this crisis was saying right at the very beginning that there was no military solution. It's bad foreign policy to tell the other side what you are not going to do. And by ruling out any type of military response, we gifted Russia escalation preference. It's all been about their choices, their movement of the ratchet up and down. Whereas now, with a little bit of uncertainty back on our side, they don't know how far we are going to move the ratchet. This is a bit more like the situation in 2008, when we were also criticised for not doing enough to help Georgia. We don't know the full story of why the Russians did not march all the way to Tbilisi, but one reason they did not do so was they were uncertain about America's intentions, what the American fleet was going to do. So a little bit of uncertainty is good. These are also smart sanctions and smart conditionality. I particularly like the provision to sanction Russian defence companies, not just for selling, but for moving their equipment to Ukraine. i.e., if it is proven to be in Ukraine, they get sanctioned. That is excellent. There's also a provision to sanction Gazprom if we get another gas cut-off in the middle of a cold winter. Or both excellent ways of shaping behaviour and incentives. The collapse of the ruble, the whole last 2 years really, or last 3 years really, of Russian economic policy making, show that we understand how markets work and the Russian elite does not. I say 3 years because I'm dating it back to the departure of Mr. Kudrin, who did used to understand these things. The ham-fisted attempt to raise interest rates by so much to further destroy the domestic economy, which completely failed, was extremely indicative of this. The sanctions again tighten the screw on some very important things for the Russian elite. Russian corporate finance, Russian state debt is minimal. Italy, Britain would love to be in that situation, but their corporate debt is immense, it's huge, for the same reason that their state debt is non-existent. Russia used energy money to pay off its state debt. Russian corporates used those revenues to borrow heavily in the West, so they are massively indebted. And they face something like 150 billion repayments in the next 6 months. So the sanctions hurt. They are supposed to hurt. And we should not stop just because they hurt. They're supposed to hurt the Russians because they deserve it. They're supposed to hurt us a little because we promised to do the right thing and take that pain. Now, therefore, is not the moment to stop. The Russian economy will not collapse. The reason that it's vulnerable to sanctions is because it is not Cuba. Russia is an energy economy, so it's very immobile. It's a slow-moving ocean liner. So, because it's not manoeuvrable, and because, as Merkel said to Putin the other week, you don't sell anything, right, apart from oil and gas. Either they make money from oil and gas or they don't. It's very hard to shift your markets. It's all about the amount of rent that you get from that basic business. So the rent is falling. That will encourage them to change behaviour. Once the sanctions go down, the rent will increase again. It is very significant that, according to Bloomberg, they did this through calculating assets, but Russia's richest 20 individuals lost 10 billion in 2 days this week. That's $500 million each. Okay. That's the kind of thing that concentrates people's minds. But in Europe, there are three forces, or three trends. One could be summarised by Merkel's journey. Merkel has become increasingly distrustful of Putin because she meets him a lot. So she's got fed up personally of being lied to. So German state policy has changed dramatically in the second half of the year, partly because Merkel is a good politician also, and she recognises that German public opinion changed after the downing of MH17, and she's moving with that public opinion. But secondly, within Germany, and Germany is key, you have the Russlandversteher that my colleague mentioned, Russia Understanders. They published an open letter on the 5th of December. It was called Another War in Europe, Not in Our Name, signed by the likes of Gerhard Schröder and former President Herzog. The whole point of Russlandversteher is that they don't understand. Right? They don't understand Russia because they don't analyse it. They simply reflect Russian propaganda themes to the West. And another war in Europe is precisely one of those. Right? There are many, many steps that we would need to get through before getting into outright confrontation with a nuclear-armed Russia. So we should not phrase the dilemma in those binary terms. Either we do nothing or it's nuclear war. There are all sorts of little things, big things that we can do before we get to them. So in Germany you have, and Germany in many ways symbolises Europe, this conflict between official foreign policy, Merkel's foreign policy, which has changed a lot, and this desire amongst the Russlandversteher to build sanctions down already. So the third thing about Europe is inertia. There are some advantages to being a slow-moving bureaucratic organisation. One of which is that the key sanctions were imposed in July and September, announced in August. And normally they are for 12 months. So the key point here is that in normal circumstances those sanctions would not be reviewed until July, although politics can of course intervene. And by July we will know one way or the other. If the Russian economy can hemorrhage as much money as it has in 2 days this week, we will know one way or the other by July. The one thing that Alexei didn't talk about is whether Ukraine will get to July. There are some big questions about internal reform and the state of the economy. What sort of state Ukraine will become. So, the EU can actually do what it does best, which is to do nothing. or rather not to take the false step of building sanctions down at this moment. The worst thing that you can do is to announce sanctions and to change them before they've had an effect. And that's actually what we did in Georgia. Sanctions were imposed in 2008. They were taken off before any of the conditions were met. That only emboldened Russia. To finish, I'd just like to make 2 points about why Crimea and Ukraine are not faraway countries about which Italy should care very little. Firstly, Italy only exists because of Crimea. A pause to let you all to remember your history. The Piedmontese fought alongside the French and the British and the Ottomans in the Crimean War, and the good credit they earned smoothed the path towards Italian unification, or the final stages of Italian unification 10 years later.
Good diplomacy.
Yeah. And secondly, do not believe what you hear about eternal Russian Crimea. Crimea was Italian for longer than it has ever been Russian, because it was ruled by the Genovese from the 13th, 14th to the 15th century. Thank you.
So on this provocation note.
Okay.
Okay.
What I'm, before, I would like to make some preliminary remarks, just in order not to be misunderstood by what I'm going to say. First of all, I agree that what Putin did in relation to Crimea, or in relation to the eastern parts of the country, was completely unacceptable. I also think that the sanctions were one instrument that was needed. I still think that there should always be a strategy behind such an instrument, such a tool. Having said that, what strikes me is that we talk about Russia, but we don't talk about Ukraine. I haven't heard really much about what's happening now in the country. I happened to be the ambassador of Italy to Kiev during the Orange Revolution. And I still remember that immediately after the victory of Yushchenko, 1 week later, a month later perhaps, the problems started with Timoshenko. And then there were accusations of corruption. Mr. Poroshenko was involved. And then we know the story. We know that what happened. And at that time, the country was really, everybody, even Putin was really, it had been a defeat, but he was not trying to do anything. And then the opportunity slipped away. Now we are in a situation where, there is a conflict in the territory. I think that it would be in the interest also of your points of view, of the Ukrainian points of view, to know, to say exactly what's happening. I heard about the fact that what happened is a cemented national unity. Honestly, I've been reading not only the international press, but some of the Ukrainian press. What happened in the eastern regions. I mean, I'm not talking about the master Russians who were there fighting and so on. I'm talking about the civilian population. These people suffered, and they were biased already in favor of the party of regions. I've no idea, but I think that the situation there is not one where national unity has been cemented. It has been a tragedy. Also, the European press and the Western press has been saying about what has happened with voluntary troops who were fighting. The Azov contingent, with a Nazi flag and so on. I always have thought that all the talks by the Russians about the right, the Nazi right was exaggerated. But what happened there is something that happened. And it must be said, it must be recognized. In order to say it is a mistake, we have to try to correct it. What is happening now in the government, I talk about Yushchenko and Timoshenko. I mean, I've been reading this article in the Daily and so on, and what you read is that the government has problems inside. There is already a rivalry between Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk. Why am I saying that? I think the most important thing that Europe can do is help Ukraine financially, politically, be on the side of Ukraine. That's the one way of winning the battle. But having said that, we must have a Ukraine that is worth fighting for. And we need the guarantees about what's happening inside the Ukraine is the right process. And I think when we talk about these things, we should know about this, not only the problems of Russia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another question here, and then I will come back to the Deputy Minister as he has to leave us.
Guido Lenzi, a former Italian diplomat. To the ambassador of Ukraine, I would venture to reply that European values, in the end, will defend themselves. They're strong enough to withstand all of the difficulties that we're facing. To Vice Minister Pistelli, if I understood correctly, he just came back from Russia. Is there any indication that you could give us about what you got, the impressions or the indications that you got in Russia? We know very well what our shortcomings can be, what the risks we're running, but then what is the situation on the other side of the fence? You were privileged to go and talk to them. Could you tell us something about it?
Okay, let's return to the Deputy Minister, and then we'll make another round of the questions.
Sorry, I have to be very brief because I have to rush to the ministry because I'm out of Rome, out from Rome since Monday. So I have a ton of paper on my desk, and I hope you will understand it. A couple of bullet points. First of all, about sanctions, I disagree. We were effective in putting sanctions. I understand that we can make a lot of fun about European Union. I mean, it's an easy sport, it's an easy job. But sanctions have been effective. There will be a deadline, which is mid-March. We will make an assessment about the relation between sanctions and politics on the ground. That's the right time frame. Not before, not after. That's the right time frame. And I'd like to underline that what US President Barack Obama is doing is in this way aligning to the kind of sanctions that already EU has adopted, and not the other way around, just to put it very clear. Second point, market economy is a challenge for a lot of countries. Don't go, I won't go far beyond by saying that. I understand the structural fragility of the Russian economy, structural fragility. I think they are paying a terrible delay, not having taken profit from the time where the oil price was $135, $140 a barrel. So now they are paying a price, but sorry to say that in a number of countries, market economy is still a target to reach, even in Ukraine, and you know all of that. My point, I appreciate the 7th Cavalry that came from former diplomats, from former Italian diplomats, is that we have to approach this issue in a less radicalized way. Just to remember that President Poroshenko was serving in Yanukovych government. I mean, I don't think that a country can make a step forward if any issue is dealt in black and white. We did so many mistakes in some other part of the world by saying, from now on you are the enemy. Get your boot out of my house. So please do not replicate this issue in Ukraine, because Ukraine is a big country, it's 45 million people. It is a very relevant strategic country for us, but we have to be helpful also in, I would say, not to force, but to address the political internal debate in a less radicalized way. That's my humble suggestion. I mean, things will be easier, not tougher, if we are able to understand each other, even during a conflict. Third point about European values, I fully agree. To be very true with you, Ambassador, is not only about Ukraine. Now I'm wearing a government hat. 7 months in government, but I've been 17 years in parliament. And I suffered very much when I felt a couple of years ago, but the situation is not that much better now, some domestic debate, just to mention a case, Hungary. and some very harsh issues rising up in the Hungarian debate. And also in that case, the European Council was silent. So it's not only about countries which are in conflict. It's about finding the right fine-tuning when even some domestic debate is going far beyond the lines, the red lines that everybody of us is in its own soul, and which is, I would say, embodied in the European cornerstone and pillars of our European identity. So less radical. About Russia, you know, I mean, my visit was very timely. They were on the roller coaster. So we have debated a lot about economic problems. We have debated a lot about Middle East, because this is my mandate, about Iran, about Libya, so it's not about Ukraine. They are very realistic with sanctions. They understand. They know that this is a tool. This is a tool in a political and diplomatic toolbox. So they are dealing with it. If I can tell you just a Russian ironic insight about that, it's not about European sanctions, about US in this case. They told me, you know, we received sanctions in 1973 because of a restriction on the Jewish people not being allowed to go to Israel. It's 8 years' time that we don't, American sanctions. It's 8 years' time that Jewish people have no need any visa to go to Israel, but the US Congress lifted up sanctions 2 years ago. 6 years later, then, I mean, there's complete freedom to move from and to and from Moscow to Tel Aviv, just to tell you the way they are dealing with. But they're looking at mid-March. They hope that an agreement, the Minsk contact that you mentioned, will be reached on the ground and will be maintained on the ground. And if that is the case, in March 2015, we will draw a line and we will see where we'll go from that point. Just to end, I mean, allow me to give you an additional argument, which is very much in Berlusconi style, because it's a funny story. But I was told a funny story just yesterday on the Red Square, having a night walk on the Red Square, and was coming from a Russian. I was scratching him on Ukraine, and he said, you know, I mean, we have a long tradition in inventing funny story in every turning point of our history. So the new one is about a Russian visitors flying to London. He lands in Heathrow, go to the passport control, and the officer says, nationality, Russian. Occupation? No, just for tourism. So thank you.